Hello and welcome. So glad to have you join us this week for the COVID-19 Survey Methods Working Group. My name is Dr. Eric Kennedy, and I'm an assistant professor of disaster and emergency management at York University in Toronto, Canada. This is a series that's dedicated to COVID survey research in all of its many and diverse forms. We have a chance to talk with experts who are doing research from huge, massive studies across Facebook and social media platforms through to very small scale targeted research projects looking at particular contexts or topics. This week, I'm really excited because we're going to have a chance to chat with Dr. Mason and Dr. Willen, who are involved in the Pandemic Journaling Project, which is a really impressive and exciting initiative to try to capture some rich data from participants about how folks are experiencing the pandemic and what they're going through, and not just make this available for their personal analysis too, but help to create a record that might be of interest and utility down the road too. And so in just a couple of moments, we will hear from them in terms of telling us a bit about their project and then starting the conversation with the group. To that end, these sessions always thrive based on the questions that you have. So whether you're joining live on the Zoom call or whether you are watching via YouTube, feel free to use the chat in either place to ask your questions throughout. And I'll try to curate those together into a conversation that makes sense and flows along. And if you are watching this after the fact on YouTube as well, please use the link in the description to get linked up with the Survey Methods Working Group so that you can receive invitations to the Zoom call versions and participate here in this particular space as well in real time. Without any further ado, though, I would really love to invite Drs. Mason and Willen to share with us about the Pandemic Journaling Project and the really cool work that they've been up to there. So we'll have a presentation from them and then open this up for discussion from the group. Thank you so much to you both for being with us today and being willing to share.
Thanks for having us. We're really happy to be here and share what we've been trying to do over the past, what has it been, Sarah, 8 months, I guess? 6 months, 7 months? I don't know. Time has stopped making a lot of sense.
30 weeks.
Yeah, 27 weeks is where we are now. And I'm just going to share my screen and I'm going to start talking. We have a few slides and then Sarah, feel free to just talk over me when I forget something.
Maybe while you're getting set up, Kate, I'll just mention briefly that both Kate and I are medical anthropologists. So we're trained in sociocultural anthropology, and we also have, interests in health and familiarity with the health and public health world. And that's really the intersection from which this project emerged, although it's quite interdisciplinary, as you'll hear in a moment.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to start there too, because I just want to warn any of the quant people in the audience that Sarah and I are trained as anthropologists, which means that quantitative research is not really our main focus at all, although we both do have some experience with mixed methods work, especially Sarah's been involved with a big project that maybe she'll tell you about later called Arches that looks at health equity and also uses mixed methods. But the heart of this project is really the qualitative material, but we are really excited that we are able to include some quantitative material as well. So I'll try to give you all an overview of what we're doing, and then we'll really look forward to your thoughts. So we're, as Sarah mentioned, we co-founded this project back in April. It launched in May. And this is just a kind of what the top of the website looks like. And there's the URL if anybody wants to go there. And this really grew out of Sarah's idea. I mean, we were both kind of, as medical anthropologists, really thinking about how we could try to understand and capture and record how people are feeling through this very strange time. But for this particular project, Sarah really had inspiration from a colleague of hers at UConn, who wrote to her and her colleagues in March and said, "We are not often consciously thrust into history. Now we are. It is an opportunity to learn about ourselves and our society. Afterwards, it'll be an occasion to assess later myth-making and conventional wisdom about the pandemic." And from that sort of inspiration about being thrust into history and trying to capture that, we developed this project that has 4 main goals. And this makes it kind of an unwieldy project because it's trying to do a lot of things at once, only some of which we have actually trained how to do. So that's why we'll look forward to anyone's feedback on any aspect of this. But from a historical angle, we're trying to pre-design a historical archive. And we particularly wanted to make sure that we were including the voices during this time, the experiences of those who aren't necessarily usually well represented in historical documents. So underrepresented minority groups, people who don't necessarily have a ton of education or a ton of literacy. And although we're still working on trying to get better representation from some of those groups, we have made some progress, and we've designed the study in such a way as to be very accessible to anyone. You don't need a computer. You can just use a smartphone. You don't need to write anything. You can record yourself talking, or you can take pictures. And I'll go over that in a moment. So we wanted to pre-design an archive that had certain elements that we knew we would want to know about in the future, like who are these folks who are writing, and a little bit about them. We also, as social scientists, wanted to collect some quantitative and especially qualitative data from a broad range of people. We wanted to provide a mental health intervention because we know from a lot of evidence that journaling is very good for lowering stress levels. And so while this is in no way meant to be a replacement for professional mental health services, we thought it could be helpful to some people in managing their mental health challenges during this time. And we wanted to provide a public service. So a big part of this is trying to make it user-friendly and allow people to preserve their own records of this time, download them, and keep them for posterity themselves. So this is just, I should have this on slideshow, shouldn't I? Okay, try again. This is, play from current slide. That's not playing. Sorry, folks. My technology is failing me. Oh, let me try one more time.
You had it a second ago.
What's that?
You had it just a minute ago.
Okay.
There we
all
go.
right.
Perfect.
Got it. Sorry. That's better. Okay, I knew there was something wrong there. So here's our advisory board and research team. We have a large number of people helping us with this, ranging from senior faculty, junior faculty, students. We have a large student advisory board that Sarah started to assemble when she first started getting this project off the ground at UConn. And our RAs there at the bottom who really do everything. And with their help, we have so far recruited, this slide is already a little bit out of date. What's the number now, Sarah? Do you know the number of people we have?
It's closer to, I think we're around 600. We haven't checked in the past couple of weeks, but
So
it's around 600.
Yeah, it's a few weeks out of date, but we have many hundreds of people who are participating, who have contributed closing and now on 5,000 journal entries. So we have some people who have been with us since the end of May and have contributed every single week. And we have some people who just joined us last week. And we have some people who journal for a few weeks and then sort of drop off the map, or who do that and then come back. So it is sort of a mixed bag in terms of how many people are staying with us for how long. And this is the breakdown in terms of race, which we are continuing to work on diversifying our pool of participants, but we think we're doing pretty well with regards to race. We do have a gender problem, so something like 2/3 to 3/4 of our participants are women. And so we are also trying to get more men to participate, which has been a challenge. Most people are contributing in English, but we do have a Spanish mirror site. Everything is available in Spanish, and we have about 20% of our participants participating in Spanish. A lot of those are from Mexico. For whatever reason, this project has been popular in Mexico. Our participants tend to be relatively young, although they do kind of span the gamut in terms of age. And they come from 25 countries. Here's kind of what it looks like in terms of US participation, which is the large majority of our participants. So they are from all over the country. We are missing some states. There's certainly concentrations on the coasts, which do not surprise us. And this is our international participation. So the US is certainly has the most participants, but we have healthy participation from Mexico and Latin America, as well as the UK, and then a kind of smattering of other participants from other countries.
If I could just jump in for 1 second. Okay, we don't have much representation from Canada yet. So we would invite our Canadian friends to share news of the project with anyone who might be interested. And we'll say more about how and why you might want to do that later on.
Yeah, thank you. And that is true, and kind of curious. I think we have more British participants than Canadian for whatever reason. Yeah. And I should note just on that angle that everything is available in English and Spanish, but people can contribute in any language. And we do occasionally have participants, doing the project with the English prompts, but contributing in Chinese, for example. We had a participant who did that. So it is possible to participate in any language. We would love to offer the interface in more languages, but it's just a matter of manpower and money at this stage in terms of our ability to do that. So the way it works is that people sign up on our website. They take a baseline survey, which we'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. And then every week, including at baseline, there are 2 journaling prompts. And then every Tuesday, once you've signed up, by email or text message, you will receive a link to that week's brief survey plus new prompts. There's one journaling prompt that's repeated every week, and that's how is the coronavirus pandemic affecting your life right now? So purposefully very open-ended, so people can write about whatever they want. And then we have some more targeted prompts that we draw from a long list that we have developed with the help of our advisory board. And I'll go over that a little more in a sec. So for each entry, participants can either write down their entry, they can record their voice and upload an audio file, or they can upload a photo and either write or upload an audio file talking about that photo. And we do have a lot of people who, we have fewer than we would like who are doing the recording their voice, although we do have some, and we really love getting those because it's really kind of amazing hearing people actually talk. We have a lot of people who do upload photos, and that often includes photos of their own artwork. So we do have quite a bit of artwork in our archive. Some features of what we do with this stuff once people participate. So participants can log into our system at any time to view and download all of their journal entries. It'll come compiled in a PDF file. And if there are photo or audio files, those will be kind of attached separately. And these are linked. Sarah, did you want me to click on these links to show people, or can show them later?
You could if you'd like. It's up to you. I think the featured entries page might be a little more interesting.
Yeah, I'll show the featured entries page just for a second. This is a curated selection of entries. So when people, each time they make a journal entry, they check a box whether they would like to make it publicly available. Now, when they do that, that doesn't automatically make the entry publicly available. We wanted to avoid having just a free-for-all. But what it does do is it shuttles it to our admin system where we can then curate a selection of entries on our featured entries page. And I'll just show you that for a second. Or not.
Or we could just skip that. I did include the link in the chat. So if folks want to check it out, it's number 3 of the 5 links that I shared in the chat.
Yeah, sorry about that. And we can show you that later. So after the pandemic is over, which we're defining as when the World Health Organization declares an end to the pandemic, which will happen eventually, apparently. At that point, we will consider data collection to be complete. Now that's there's sort of an asterisk there because we are planning to do follow-up with some people who participate in the project, but we won't actively solicit new participants anymore. And at that point, the entire data set will be deposited in the qualitative data repository, which is hosted at Syracuse University. And it will be made accessible to other researchers under set terms. So they'll have to sign some materials, and there will be certain terms to their use. And then 25 years following the end of the pandemic, all the data will be deposited as a public historical record, probably at our university archives, but we haven't exactly made any promises about that, I don't think. So at that point, it will be available as a public record for anybody to access. Okay, so just to give you an idea of the survey questions, we sort of just pulled a lot from a lot of different places to try to provide as much basic background on who is participating as we could get. So we have some standard demographic questions, gender, race, economic status, education, things like that. We have mental health questions as well as physical health questions, drawing from these scales. We have questions regarding COVID-19 exposure and to what extent, if at all, people are trying to mitigate that exposure. We also have questions about politics. So one of our early collaborators, Abby Williams at Trinity College, she is a political scientist, and so she was very involved with developing this baseline survey. And so we have quite a few questions about political leanings in there as well. And we ask some of these as periodic survey questions. So the health questions come every 2 weeks. We ask about COVID exposure every 6 weeks. We ask about social isolation every 6 weeks, and government and politics every 6 weeks. So not every question that we ask at baseline, but a selection of questions that we do repeat so that we can follow people over time. The journaling prompts we developed with a lot of input from our advisory board, as well as Sarah's students in an anthropology seminar that she kind of turned into a workshop during the second half of the semester when everything went to hell and everybody went home. And then we reviewed, revised, and expanded this list, and we're continuing to expand it because the pandemic just keeps on going, and so we need more questions to ask. These are just a couple of a few examples of the journaling prompts that we have used. They're pretty open-ended, but they try to kind of steer people in a particular direction so that people feel like they have some sort of, someone was putting it as guardrails. I think some people struggle with things being too open-ended. They want to be asked a particular question. And so this kind of appeals to people on that level. And we've gotten good feedback about that. Participants choose one of 2 prompts for their second prompt each week. So the first prompt is always, what's going on with you? How is the coronavirus pandemic affecting you this week? And the second prompt is something a little more specific, but not too specific. Our recruitment is, we try to accomplish through a number of methods. So we started out really just wanting to get anybody who was willing to participate, as many people as possible. Now we're starting to work with some of our colleagues to develop more particular projects, looking at particular groups of people. And so we'll be looking to recruit from particular populations that we're interested in. But we have very active social media presence, and we do use that to recruit people with varying levels of success. But we try to appeal to, the one on the left was meant to appeal to older participants. And we're trying to recruit some older participants who might be interested in kind of recording stories for their children and their grandchildren. We have developed an educator resources page that provides ideas for how to use the Pandemic Journaling Project in the classroom. And we do have, Sarah, isn't it something like 10 different universities are using this now?
Yeah, I think we're over 10 at this point, faculty using the project in different ways. Obviously we couldn't require any students, no faculty member can require their students to participate, but you can invite your students to participate, you can borrow the questions, you can take the prompts and offer them to your students as interview prompts for them to use in interviewing other people. So there's a range of ways in which faculty at different universities, ranging from community colleges to Ivy League universities, and kind of everything in between are playing with this, exploring it as a tool for teaching and thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. So this was meant to try to encourage people to talk about their experiences with work or lack thereof. Most weeks or every other week at least, we will have a quote from someone on our advisory board just talking about what the project means to them. So these nice images, by the way, I should note, have all been created by our amazing team of RAs, in particular, Alice Laratonda and Emily Nguyen, who's an undergrad student interested in social media design. We've also begun starting to publish a few items. So this was a co-authored piece that Sarah did with two of her students on decolonizing future histories of COVID-19. Published in the Thinking Republic. And we have one piece in a peer-reviewed journal at this stage in Jewish social studies that focused on our Jewish journalers, I should say. Just to give you a sense of some of the journal entries that have been coming in, I mean, we have almost 5,000 of them, so this is a very small little taste, obviously. These are some of the photo ones that are accompanied by text. This person wrote about their use of embroidery as a kind of self-soothing device. A nice image there. We like this one with the Diplodocus eating the plant. People post all sorts of quirky things. This was when the fires were really raging on the West Coast, and people were taking images of that, thinking about being trapped in more ways than one. We have had a number of people who have lost someone due to COVID, and they have written about that. This is actually at a grave site, and talking about having to test Zoom bandwidth at a funeral for their mother. So that's a new kind of experience. And I think that's it for now. Sarah, do you want to add anything before we take questions?
No, I think we already have a couple of good questions coming in. So happy to go ahead into a discussion.
Well, thank you so much for this introduction. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and to share this project. And it's hard to imagine the amount of work that has gone into all the aspects of this. It's a huge undertaking. And so I commend you for that. And I'm excited to dig into that in our discussion. As a reminder, you're welcome to ask questions here in the chat or on YouTube. If you're watching there, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll keep an eye on them so that we can make sure to ask them in the discussion here. To get started, I want to go back to this notion that you introduced at the beginning of pre-designing a historical archive, because I just love that sentiment and all of the challenges and possibilities that it conjures up. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about your thought process as you were going through that very initial ideation and you were sort of beginning to think about what could and should this archive look like.
Sure, Kate. I don't see Kate. So if you want to turn your camera back on, Kate, I think everyone will be glad to see you, but maybe I'll take a stab at that one while you're getting back up and running. I will say, Kate shared the quotation from my historian colleague, Richard Brown, at the beginning. And I will say this was a conversation we started having with historians from the very beginning. And one of the things that we wanted to think about, as you can tell, and you're absolutely right, Eric, in suggesting that this has been a pretty complex undertaking. We've hacked a lot of systems to make this happen. So we've had to kind of think creatively with IRBs, with university security protocols, with survey software and programs. So this whole thing runs in Qualtrics, which is not at all designed to do what we've asked it to do, but we've figured out how to make it do much of what we want it to do. It's not seamless. There are lots of kind of back-end challenges. We've had to think about how we create access, an access platform that's secure and that's separate from both the Qualtrics system and also our website, which is hosted by a university. So we've got basically 3 different things going on, lots of stuff happening behind the scenes, not always in perfect alignment. But in terms of pre-designing an archive, one of the things we had to start with at the very beginning is the fact that we weren't going to ask people to identify themselves. So how do you protect human subjects and at the same time generate data that's going to be useful to people who want to be able to look at social and political and economic trends, right? So we said, well, we've got to have some demographics on people. So then the question became, well, what demographics do we need? What do we need to know about people such that whatever they contribute will be usable to people who can't go and figure out who their aunt was and their cousin and who they were married to and what street they lived on. So that's, I would say, the first challenge that we had to think through in terms of pre-designing an archive. And it came from that kind of messy intersection between what historians want and what social scientists want and are able to generate in a way that's going to stand up to both our own disciplinary values and culture and also what the IRB would permit.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I'm curious about is how that played out in terms of the team that you brought together, sort of how you as an anthropologist think about this archive versus the hardcore historians and the like. Were there moments where there were sort of really divergent or differing or contested views on what should be included?
I'll give you, since this is a survey research group, I'll give you some of the interesting challenges. So some of the really interesting challenges have come about, for instance, when our colleagues in Asian American studies have said, your demographic categories are junk. That question won't tell you anything meaningful because it's not nuanced enough. Or, we've had colleagues otherwise questioning the wording of validated questions. And we worked very hard. Kate mentioned that from the very beginning, we were working with the political scientist Abigail Fisher Williamson at Trinity College, whom I've worked with on another project, and she's my go-to survey expert. She knows what she's doing. I defer to her. I think we as a team have deferred to her on lots of important stuff. But since she and I have been collaborating as an anthropologist and a political scientist, these are exactly the fights that we've been having. This is the validated question. Well, it's not a useful question. How do you kind of navigate that and get to a place? Do you write a new question? Do you tweak an existing question? Or do you just throw the whole thing out and say, I don't care what the validated measure is. This is what I want to know. It's not important to me to be able to put it in conversation with other data sets. So that's sort of the trickiest spot I think from the standpoint of this group, probably.
Yeah, we need to write a whole book in the wake of COVID on validated measures in emergencies, because this is just such a fascinating issue of how you adapt things to new threats, how you deal with this question of should we use the okay validated one versus the one that's really where we want it, and what do you do as the pandemic changes and as the issues you want to understand change. And so I want to we'll come back to that idea of change here for a second. I'm wondering if you can talk about the processes of anticipation that you went through. So how did you decide what would be relevant and what would be of interest and salient, not just about the pandemic in the week you were designing it, but thinking about designing a system that would remain relevant and remain useful 6 months from the start, 12 months from the start, more?
Sure. And Kate, are you still there? Because I didn't see you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I think we can hear you. Well, it's just the video that's a little garbled.
The video is still not working? Huh, it says it is on my end. I'm so sorry. Well, anyway, I will work on that.
We can hear you well, so.
You can hear me, okay, good. So I will work on the video in a minute, but yeah, I mean, this has been a really big challenge that we have struggled with over and over again. And right from the beginning is, how do we design questions, especially the journaling questions, that will be relevant when we're first thinking of them in April and will still be relevant 6 or even 12 months down the line. And I think, one of the things that has made that really challenging is that from the beginning we developed, we were running this through a cohort design. So meaning that everybody gets the same questions in the same order, no matter when they join. That has made created another set of issues that has been very challenging, which is that now we've been running this for 27 weeks. We have, what is it, Sarah, like 50 different surveys going out each week, because we also have Spanish. So that's one issue. But the other issue being that, someone might be in week 2 in April, they might be in week 2 in June, they might be in week 2 now. And there are obviously different things going on, and also depending on where you are. I mean, we realized early on that some of the questions we wanted to ask early on about being in quarantine were later on not relevant in certain parts of the country, take on a different countenance in another part of the country, or something else entirely if you're thinking outside of the US. And so I think that the way that we've tried to deal with that is to think very hard about, is this a question that someone could answer no matter what is going on, right? They might answer it in a very different way, which is a challenge, of course, for analyzing the data, because they might be referring to something completely different than the person answering it 6 months earlier. But we tried to develop questions that were not so specific that they were dependent upon being asked at a certain period of time.
But to give an example of how tricky that can be, for instance, we realized very early on, so the murder of George Floyd happened just as we were launching. How do we ask about that in such a way that we're formulating questions that will be sustained with the cohort design, that will be as relevant in 6 months as they are 2 weeks after his murder? So these are real challenges, and they've not been easy to address. But we've really been thinking about question design with this kind of evergreen model in mind. I think it's been working reasonably well. There's something lost, right? We can't ask everyone participating the week before the United States election, wherever they are in the world, how you feeling right now about, pandemic response globally, or the stability of, democracy worldwide. That a question like that won't generate the full panel of responses because of the cohort design. And there's a loss there, but we think there are some gains because we can, we have obviously time as well as location data on all of our responses.
That's great. And just to clarify there, when you're saying this cohort design where people get asked questions in the same weekly series, is that for the survey questions you're asking, or also the writing prompts?
Everything.
Okay, so people are progressing through this individually at very different kinds of paces if I signed up today versus someone who signed up right at the get-go.
Yeah, the pace is the same, but you start, you're not jumping into the river, wherever it is. You're jumping into the beginning of the river and you're taking the ride from the beginning whenever you begin.
Much better way of putting it. Yeah.
I don't know. We're playing with metaphors here.
And we've got so many good questions in the chat already. And so we're going to start to try and pull some of these in. But just before we do that, I do want to ask about this question of benefits to participants, because this is a part of an institutional review board application that many of us gloss over, right? And put in some sort of throwaway lines about, oh, well, they'll learn something when we publish, right? But it sounds like you've really tried to sort of think about the substantive benefits for people being able to participate. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you've tried to maximize that or think about that in your design.
Sure. You want to do that, Kate?
Yeah, I can start and maybe you can jump in. And I apologize again about my video. This is every time I try to actually talk to anybody in anything where there's more than one person is when my internet decides to not work. So apologies for that. Yeah, in terms of benefit to participants, we've thought long and hard about this because we felt it was really important not to be extractive during this time. This is a really difficult time for a lot of people. And because we did very much want to reach people who are not only middle-class, white educated people, even though that is a lot of the people who are doing it currently, but not all of them. that we know that people in certain populations are struggling more than others, and we wanted to provide something in return. And it's not going to solve anyone's problems or anything, but we felt that having an outlet that would actually might improve their mental health, and making sure that they own and are able to hold on to that information themselves was really important to us. So we did not want to just take data from people. We wanted to kind of co-create that data with our participants, and they continue to own that. As part of the consent, we have the right to use it, but they continue to own all of that material, including their photography and everything. And we worked very hard with a web designer to design the My Journals page so that it would be very user-friendly, easy to use, and also be able to collate all of that material together for them so that they would have a record of everything that they did in a kind of user-friendly format. And so, it's not going to solve anyone's larger COVID problems, but we wanted to be part of the solution rather than just extracting something for ourselves.
Yeah, if I could add in a couple other pieces, so I think the piece that Kate has laid out is the most important one, that we wanted to be providing people an opportunity to create a way for themselves to remember and share their experiences, with other people that they care about now or in the future. We sort of imagine people taking this, we hope that the data files will be accessible in 25, 50 years, but you can imagine a grandparent taking this material and sharing it with their grandchildren in the way some of us have had a chance to look at letters from our own grandparents, or, if we're historians, go into an archive and look at historical material. So that's sort of the first piece. And then there are others as well, and they might be throwaways, but we do a monthly raffle for gift cards. So we raffle off 3 $100 gift cards each month. And we do think that for many people, not all, visiting the featured entries page that we curate is also a benefit, in some respects. So feeling part of a community of people who are reflecting together, having an opportunity to get a window onto the experiences of other people is, for some folks we've heard from, meaningful in itself. And then there is, as Kate mentioned, the potential mental health benefit of what's often called in the psychological literature expressive writing. This isn't, formally designed as an intervention, although we're developing some spin-off research projects that will have more of an intervention component. But there are really those 4 pieces. There's something you can hold on to and keep. There's the opportunity to potentially benefit from a mental health standpoint. There's the opportunity to feel part of a community of people reflecting together, and it's not a nasty social media space. You can't like or comment on other people's journal entries. And then finally, we do have this raffle each month.
So one of the things I'm curious about, and it came up early in the questions from Andrea here, I, in some survey projects before, have encountered these challenging moments, ethically speaking, where people are confessing moments of great distress or anguish, and we as researchers have to think about how we deal with this. And it's even more prevalent in, say, diary studies, where you are getting these kinds of unvarnished windows into people's lives. How did you plan for, and what's your protocol and strategy around dealing with the kinds of anguish and hurt and unvarnished life experiences that you might encounter in these submissions?
Yeah, I can take that to start. So this is something that we've thought about a lot as well, and certainly had to include in our IRB. And there are a few parts to it. One is we do have a mental health resources tab on our website, and we refer people to that. The other is that we do reach out if something seems really amiss. So, we're both medical anthropologists. We do have experience working with people who have had serious struggles. So it's not foreign to us, but we're not clinicians, right? So we can't provide those kinds of services. But we did have an instance just last week, I think, when someone submitted something that was somewhat disturbing. They weren't threatening any harm to themselves, but they did discuss having had those thoughts in the past, and they seemed very, very distressed. And so we did reach out to them. We let them know that we had noticed that they were struggling. We asked if we could help them find resources in their area, and we provided them with some crisis hotlines and things like that. So that's what we feel we can do in this particular context, but it is something we feel strongly about, that it is our responsibility to take that seriously. The other thing I would say is that we do not post entries that we get that are very disturbing. So, I mean, we do post things where people are talking about being upset or feeling depressed, but we don't post anything that, might be something that would be very likely to trigger someone else to do something. Although again, of course, it's not a perfect system.
I see the question that's just come in about individuals outside the US. This most recent case that Kate described actually was in Mexico. And so we did a little poking around. We know where people are coming from. We can look at their week 1 baseline survey. And we do in our consent procedures let people know that if we are concerned, we will reach out to local authorities. So that's sort of built into our consent procedure. We haven't felt like it was warranted yet, but we have that in place should that feel like the appropriate thing to do.
And speaking of these ethical and institutional review board issues, I mean, one strategy here that you're taking that's different than a lot of hardcore qualitative work is adopting a real open science kind of perspective, both with this immediate role of data sharing for other interested researchers, but then also this public archiving down the road. I'm curious if you ran into any barriers with the IRB in terms of the details you're getting in that qualitative data and identifiability and things like that, or how you navigated this, because it's a different approach than is often taken by the intensely qualitative crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in our other lives, we are intensely qualitative. So you're hearing about the parts of us that grow out of a real comfort and enthusiasm about functioning and learning how to function in an interdisciplinary space, which we don't necessarily share with all of our disciplinary colleagues. I would say, again, we don't ask for names at any point. So if people want to use names and include identifiable materials, that's fine. One of the reasons we set up the 25-year protected mechanism followed by an open access period subsequent to those 25 years is that we didn't want to have responsibility for going through the entire data set and wiping out anything identifiable. That would be a huge amount of work. And we thought it would make more sense to say, let's put some controls on access and make sure that we're offering this to other researchers who'd like to use it, and they're going to observe some protective mechanisms that we're thinking through, and we're going to let the QDR at Syracuse do that work for us so that we don't have to babysit the data. And then, our assumption is, and the IRB went along with this, that 25 years from now, it won't matter as much if someone named, X person or put a phone number or an address. So that 25-year buffer is meant to kind of protect against the risks that might be associated with identifiability in terms of material that people contribute of their own accord. Beyond that, and the other thing is, for now, we are eager to collaborate. There are a number of people who are going to join us in analyzing different parts of the data, and they need to come onto our IRB at this stage before we hand everything over to the repository. So, there are mechanisms in place, there are conversations we'll have, there are agreements that we'll set in terms of how to use the material. But, I would say in terms of how to work with an IRB, probably one of the smartest things we did from the very beginning was really involve the IRB in both our goals and also our concerns, so that they wouldn't think we were nuts or asking things that were unreasonable. We've shown them that this is unusual. They know it's unusual. We happen to be working with the IRB at my institution. I've gotten other big projects through the IRB, so I have a relationship with our IRB team, and they know that if I come and say, this is what we're suggesting in good faith that we would like to do, they're willing to have a conversation. They're coming, with a hermeneutic of generosity. So for instance, we've just put through a protocol for adolescent participation, and someone asked about that in the chat. We're working out the kinks right now, but it took a while for us to find a way to ensure that we would get parental permission, which was required, but also make sure that it wasn't too onerous, that the technology worked, that it was going to be logical, that it was going to work both on computers and on phones, because we want people to be able to go through that pathway on their phones as well. And we're just working out the final kinks right now, but within the next couple of weeks, we'll have 15 to 17-year-olds participating as well. And again, it's a testament to having a good relationship with the IRB and taking them through our reasoning process. Because at first they said adolescents, and then we said, okay, let's think about how to do this. There are ways, we'll talk to the experts. We're going to map it all out for you with flowcharts, and we got it through. This episode is sponsored by the importance of good relationships with an IRB, which as a disaster researcher, I can very much relate to, because I feel like I am always coming to them with, this is literally on fire right now. Speaking of the recruitment stuff and age stuff that you highlighted in the chat, we have had a couple of questions here. So one is sort of trying to get a sense. You mentioned the, let's say, youthfulness of your participants. And I'm wondering if you have a sense of what's driving that. And then there's also a related question here around challenges that you faced and how you overcame them in terms of your recruitment and engagement strategies. Mm-hmm. Want to start off on this, Kate?
Sure. So recruitment has been something that we have been working very closely with a lot of people on for a long time, since the beginning, and it continues to be a struggle. We do skew young, we skew female. When I was sort of complaining about this to my spouse, he said, well, men don't journal. And I think that has been, as sort of silly as a statement as that sounded to me, I think that has been sort of a barrier that people have this impression. So we've thought a lot about messaging. I think one of the reasons that we skew young right now is because we do have a number of universities participating. So we have a large number of college students. Those college students range widely in terms of what types of institutions. So we have community colleges participating, we have Ivy League institutions participating, we have state universities participating. So we have a really good range of college students, but we do have a lot of college students. And the social media efforts, tend to appeal to young people as well. We have tried to overcome those things by reaching out more widely, partly with some targeted social media advertisements. So older people do tend to be on Facebook. So we've reached out via Facebook ads with varying success. That's actually how we got a lot of our participants in Mexico. For whatever reason, our Facebook ad in Mexico kind of went viral for a while, and we got like 100 participants in 2 days or something from Mexico. But we also more recently have been really focused on trying to make sure that we have a racially and ethnically diverse group of people, and that we also have a more socioeconomically diverse group of people. And so we've been working very closely with a lot of the students, many of whom come from backgrounds that are not, their parents are not necessarily very well educated. Most of them are not white. And so they've really been helping us to think through how to reach a more diverse audience, what kinds of messaging to use, what kinds of media to go through, how we can really make sure that people understand what they might be able to get out of it, to emphasize this sort of effort not to be extractive that we were talking about earlier. We did that blog post that Sarah was talking about to also try to reach out to certain groups of people. So it's something we're working hard on with a very diverse group of students and colleagues, trying to kind of crack this nut. And we have made some progress, but it's definitely a work in progress.
Yeah, I would just emphasize, our students have been tremendous resources, not just in terms of content, but in terms of platforms. And I see a great comment here about different groups are more likely to use different platforms. Obviously, this is not a representative sample. We make no pretense that it's a representative sample of anything. As we begin to develop research proposals, we're talking more about sampling and recruitment in a more targeted way. So for instance, we're working on a protocol we have a grant out, that would look at first generation college students and a parent. So that would require a different kind of recruitment strategy. Or, we have another project we're working on that would focus on Black women who are at risk of cardiovascular disease. Again, that'll require a different recruitment strategy. So we're thinking, we developed this before we had the research questions. We kind of developed it with this public good, let's just start getting it down mindset. And it's really now, 8 or so months in that we're starting to say, all right, or, maybe it's a few months now, like by late summer, we were able to start formulating research questions and thinking about the kind of recruitment strategies that would be necessary to create the sorts of samples that would generate, pilot data that could be used to put in for larger grants. So you can see there are a lot of different considerations in mind, but at the same time, we really do genuinely feel that, regardless of what the sample looks like, it's a really cool thing. And people are benefiting in different ways, and we think people will continue to benefit in different ways.
Thanks so much for that. Now, unfortunately, we're already starting to run low on time here, but I know that Bryn had a question about some of the qualitative and quantitative ways that the data can be used. So Bryn, if I can ask you to jump in with a really brief question here, and then we're going to finish off with something of a lightning round before we wrap up. Bryn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you to the two presenters. Excellent information. Somewhat, I would say, fuzzy around the edges. In other words, you are, if I've understood it properly, you do collect quantitative data, and then you've got all of these stories collected in various different ways. So you've got quantitative and qualitative data, and there is an issue of how you think that you can combine them into some sort of overall interpretive framework which talks to the social relevance of the project.
Yeah, Kate, do you want to sort of speak to this?
Yeah, I think that the answer to that is we're not really trying to come up with an overall framework that combines all of it. We have the quantitative data, which we are still trying to figure out what to do with, frankly. But as anthropologists, we find it very useful, even if we're looking at individuals. So as anthropologists, we're used to working with very small sets of people with very small ends. Even down to the level of individuals or just a very small community or family. And for us, it's very exciting to be able to look at someone who may have started journaling back in April and be able to follow not only their journal, but also alongside that, their mental health status as it may change over time, according to the mental health scale, whether they've been exposed to COVID, their political inclinations and how that might be changing over time, how they feel about government. We ask a lot of questions sort of fortuitously. I guess we did think about this ahead of time, but it became even more relevant than we, I think, had anticipated about things like how much you trust the police, how much you trust other social institutions. The changes in that over time for different groups of people could be really fascinating. And so there are a number of ways to look at this. Something that I think we realized early on is that for pure quant folks, this is not going to be a very useful data set. That's just sort of the way it is. We do have colleagues who work with mixed methods who see a lot of potential in particularly some of the more targeted research projects we're doing. But we don't really think about this as one study. We think about it as a platform that we built that can spin off a number of more targeted studies. You can use the demographic information to pull a sample of people that are all from California, all Latinx participants from California, for example, and try to look at trends there. So there are things that you can do, but there's no doubt about it. This is a diffuse all over the place kind of project. And there's no way to really kind of pull it all together into a tiny package. So I would just say we're not even going to attempt to do that.
I would say there's one way, Kate, that is quite fundamental to your, if you like, project's records. And that is that you do have the possibility of identifying a respondent to your survey, no matter how sort of out of the normal expectations they might be from a random survey. That really doesn't matter. But you've got the possibility then of tracing a respondent across time. So this is highly complex but highly relevant information to which, say a statistical model such as multi-level modeling would give you some really good insights into change over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bryn. And I think given the time, unfortunately, I'm going to need to move into this lightning round and try and bring up a couple of the themes that Bryn has been discussing here in this. So Sarah, Kate, if I can challenge you to give 10, 15-second responses to 3 final questions before we wrap up. Question number 1 is, I'm curious what prompt has worked the best and what prompt has worked the worst in terms of soliciting writing input to the stage.
Yeah.
Oh, what a terrific question. Kate, anything come to mind?
You're going to boot that over to me. Okay. I would say, certainly the one that's asked every week is very generative, the open-ended one. The other ones that have been really quite interesting, I would say the politics ones, that asks about whether people's political leanings have changed. Most people say no, but they've kind of dug in deeper, which is perhaps not surprising. We tried to ask certain questions that did not go anywhere. One of them had to do with community and trying to ask whether people felt like their community was coming together at this time. That did not speak to people at all. We tried to ask a question about whether people were feeling kind of harassed, and that did not produce a lot of responses, harassed online or otherwise. Sarah, do you have any further things to add?
Yeah, I would just follow up on that by saying that when you're dealing with a sample where people could be of any background, it's really hard to ask targeted questions about experiences of racism or discrimination, because they have to be worded in such a way that anyone could answer. And then you end up asking something kind of vague, like about your people in your community, and then nobody knows how to answer it. And it just kind of bombs.
Yeah, that's incredibly tough. Okay, on a similar note, you highlighted a couple of the initial publications and the like coming out of this, but I'm curious what is the most sort of pressing or interesting research question for you at the moment? What's the thing that if I could wave a magic wand and carve you out 3 days free from teaching and other responsibilities that you would just want to answer right now from the data you've collected?
Oh, if I could zoom that up from 3 days to 3 weeks or 3 months, we've been asked to produce an edited book that kind of organizes and compiles journal entries. And I think there would be great appeal. I think it would be just so much fun to sit and really dive into the ways in which people are, I'm going to give you a humanities answer, which is, what are people saying? How are they saying it? Who are they envisioning as their audience? Are they writing to themselves? Are they writing to a community? Are they writing to their grandchildren? So really, for me, I want to sit down and dive into the stories and think about who's telling what to whom, how, and why.
I guess I would just add to that we have been invited to present to a bunch of psychiatrists in January. And so we've been thinking a lot about the mental health piece. And I'm very interested to see how people's mental health has changed over time and how that does or does not match up to the qualitative material. So when they're talking about feeling really down, are they also answering that on the scale that we give them? And what kinds of sort of ups and downs of the pandemic relate to that or don't? And that's sort of a relatively simple question to answer, I think, but we're looking forward to hopefully answering it soon.
I love those. And the last one from me, and then I'll do the wrap up, is just if you were to look back and be able to talk to yourself back in March, what is the thing that you have learned now that you wish you had known at the beginning of this journey, looking back?
That Qualtrics does not do what we want it to do. that having 52 and then 54 and then 56 surveys to run a week is expensive and annoying. I think, if anyone knows of a survey platform that can do this better, please let us know, because this is getting really frustrating and onerous from a purely technical standpoint. But other than that, I think we've done a pretty decent job of dreaming up something a little crazy and getting it to fly.
Yeah, I would agree on that. Just the cohort design, we had our reasons for it. We stand by it, but man, it does produce an unwieldy kind of situation from a technical standpoint. So yeah, some of the logistics, I think we would have liked to have a better handle on at the beginning.
Well, thank you so much for this. It's been such an informative and exciting session, and I've just really enjoyed the chance to dig into the methodological side of this, because I had a chance to hear your talk on COVID calls and hear some of the bigger picture, but to be able to dive into the what and how it's done has been really exciting, informative, and useful. So thank you for being part of our community. Next week, for members of the working group, we have Agnes Reed coming in the Agnes Reed Forum to discuss both their public opinion research and also the Sero survey work that they've built into that. So trying to do antibody testing as part of this public research platform through the ABC study. And so that will be quite exciting. Same time, same place. We'll be on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. And for now, thank you so much again to our guest experts. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.